Bring it on. Want some, get some. How about those friggin' Pirates?
Yes, I am a pirate.
You have to go with the Pirates because, of course, they have cannons and everything.
It's a pirate's life for me.
Be proud of who you are and what you are. You're Pirates.
It is a first down. Pirates.
Because when you're at East Carolina, you go for it every time. Or you don't coach at East Carolina, you don't come to East Carolina, you don't play at East Carolina with a weak heart. Write it.
I think I've ever been in a building as loud as that was. It was deafening in there.
We will get Omaha. I can promise you that.
Pen and purple all night long in Eastern North Carolina.
You're watching The Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates.
Yeah. My heart is purple and gold. I'm a pirate down to my soul. And I don't back down, not at all. Find out when the cannons explode.
All right, welcome into the Pirate Preview right here on the Sports Objective. The Pirates' first week with Blake Harrell. We talked about that in Cal Barber. I think he's had a good couple days, and he handled things well today in his press conference.
Yeah, Blake, obviously you can tell is very high energy, very nervous guy. I don't mean nervous as in like, he's just anxious. He's amped up, but very likable. Blake's always been very likable, very much a country boy. And what is interesting to me, I don't know how successful Blake will be, but I think because of his personality, if he is successful, just hide and watch. I bet Pirate Nation, the casual fan that doesn't watch the defensive press conference every week, if Blake is successful, hide and watch. Pirate Nation will fall in love with him if he has any success. I bet you money.
Let's bring in Bubba Rosenbaum. What did you think, Bubba? I thought he did very well today this morning.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, also listened to watched his coaching show via WNCT.com last night, Inside Pirate Athletics, and I was impressed with what he had to say there, and then also in today's press conference, he made it very clear that yes, he has a long association with Mike Houston, Lenore Ryan, the Citadel, obviously now in the last 5 years at East Carolina, but and yes, he's going to do a lot of things that Coach Houston did, but at the same time, he's his own person, and he's going to be true to himself, and that there certainly will be, whether it's schematically, practice wise or other things concerning the program that he'll tweak and to align with his thoughts on things. And I was glad to hear that, and I think I think the guys will play extremely hard for him on Saturday against Temple, and I look forward to seeing the energy he brings on the sidelines, and see if he is on the sidelines the way I think he might be in terms of some of that outward expression of energy that you would expect with his personality, and I look forward to seeing how it goes.
Bubba, I'm pretty sure he's going to be a pretty electric on the sideline. He referenced running into the end zone to celebrate with the players for a touchdown during his
I laughed when he said that. I said that'd be hilarious to see a 15-yard penalty, sideline warning, seeing our head coach in the end zone, chest bumping a player or whatnot.
Yeah.
Well, let's bringing in now from a friend of ours, I think for like 5 years now, from Owls Daily 24/7, Ryan Wallen. Ryan, man, how are you? Wrestling aficionado, like for myself, Bubba, and myself, Kyle, and yourself, not Bubba, is what I was trying to say. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
No doubt. We're glad to have you. And I tell you what, it's a great matchup. It's homecoming. We love, having Temple in the conference, and hopefully we can build on what we have now with American. Had a chance to see Army, unfortunately, on Saturday. They're a really good football team, but now move on to a new era. So I will see how it plays out for Blake Harrell. From your perspective for Temple, how does it mean? Have you heard anything as far as like, hey, East Carolina doesn't have their coach this week, or is there any kind of difference there?
Yeah, I don't think from Temple's side of things they're going to approach this game any differently. I think they're still going to take them as serious as they ever were. Like you guys alluded to already, Harrell's he's been associated with Houston for a long time there, and he's going to keep these guys firing on the momentum that they have. Even though the last couple weeks hasn't gone East Carolina's way, he's going to still keep that energy and that presence in the locker room of stability that Mike Houston had. From a personal perspective and an outside perspective, I was honestly shocked that East Carolina decided to pull the trigger now on firing Mike. I thought that maybe, at the end of the season, if they hadn't turned things around, that maybe then would be the time that they would move on from him. My boss even mentioned, he thought maybe that this week's game was going to be the game that really determined Mike Houston's future at East Carolina. And, he was kind of coaching for his job against Temple this week. But I think there's two ways to really look at it. It's that East Carolina players aren't going to get up for the game because their coach was fired and they really liked Mike and the way he coached the program. I saw players from East Carolina were saying on Twitter, that they were upset at this. But then you also have the perspective of it is a new era. And, you're going to have Blake Harrell, who, like Kyle mentioned, is a very energetic coach. He's going to be a guy that's going to maybe light a fire under them and maybe get this ship righted for the Pirates. And, they're going to come out on homecoming day and really want to make a statement, especially after they've been embarrassed the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. And Ryan, just for some insight for you on Blake being Mike Houston being let go when he was, instead of waiting until later in the year. After going 2-10 last year, 6-6 or even 7-5 probably wasn't going to cut it with the multiple in-state losses. Lost to Charlotte in back-to-back years, lost 3 straight to App, never beat NC State. So it was he was in a situation where I think they wanted to make the change before you got into the crunch of trying to get bowl eligible. So it didn't end up being a situation where you were firing a coach that was bowl eligible. Should you keep him? Should you not? So I think they wanted to do it before it even became a discussion, where now you can kind of focus on trying to get to a bowl game with Blake Harrell and the staff.
Yeah, and I guess you can also argue that from a recruiting perspective, especially, trying to get some of those in-state prospects, it probably was a better decision now. I was just surprised. I was caught off guard, because a couple years ago, there were people, mentioning his name for a P5 job, and, that he had really turned the ship around there at East Carolina. And, they were having the success. They had back-to-back bowl years, and they got a bowl win. And, now he's unemployed, and, it kind of seems like we're back in Temple and East Carolina are kind of in the same boat right now.
Well, the issue is right now, like Kyle said, with the 2-10, if you didn't have such a disastrous year last year, and then you have a situation, the one thing I know that Justin said, we know that JDB will actually call the plays. I think what happened is the Charlotte game was an embarrassment. Army's a really good football team, so you don't get upset. You get upset because you lost, but you respect the fact they're a really good football team. But the 2 losses that I go back to is even beyond the Charlotte games are we blew the App State game and even the Liberty game. Both of those games were, one game you're up 17-0, the other game you're up 16-0. And then you let the foot off the gas. It's like all of a sudden you want to play conservative and try to play not to lose, milk the clock. And instead of when you got your foot on your opponent's throat, so to speak, you don't let off the gas. You keep going. And that's what I'm looking for. Guys, I was going to ask all 3 of you. Do you expect this week with JDB that we're going to see I guess I hate to use a term, but I don't know any other way, like the leash will finally be off of him? Because some people think that JDB is really not that, but I think Houston had more of a rein on things than people realize.
I have no idea. John David Baker is to me is still an unproven commodity. I heard Coach Harrell talking about really wanting to get the outside runs going, which is something I agree with. I think there's going to be a heavy emphasis on the run, which as some people think that's being conservative, but I really particularly liked him talking about the outside run game, which is something that I think that we have the strength to do and have not utilized it very well. So that'll be interesting to see. Ryan, how is Temple with defending the outside run? The outside, zone type runs. How are they on the edge?
Yeah, they've been better this year in defending the run. That's where they were really needing to fix their defense from the last couple of years, is that they've just been gashed by the rushing attacks of opponents, and particularly up the middle. But this year they've kind of been able to clog up the middle more, so teams are going a little bit more to the outside on them. They're trying to just get the ball in space and see what guys can do, and try to get just Temple's guys got eyes moving in different directions. So they've done, I'd say, pretty fair job. They really haven't been gashed for a really long run play this year that I can remember. But they are a little suspect to give up some yards in that area. There are times where they just can't get off the field in that regard, and teams can just still run the ball on them. And it's been a little bit of a struggle, but I wouldn't say that it's been a major area of concern this year as it has been in the last couple of seasons. Like I mentioned, they kind of really put an emphasis on getting more speed at the linebacker level and in the secondary. Just trying to, if the opponent's running back just gets by that first line of defense, they have guys that can actually get there and make the tackle and not let the guy just bounce off and, bust a 30-yard run on against them. So it's been better this year. It's been something that really hasn't been a major issue of late because opponents haven't been really doing a whole lot against Temple. The last couple weeks has been pretty ugly, and Temple's defense has kind of rose to the occasion. So look forward to seeing how that plays out now this week against a East Carolina team that has a better offense than what they've gone out against the last 2 weeks.
We had a comment.
Go ahead, Bubba.
Dave was this what he was addressing?
What's that?
The comment from Axel.
I didn't.
Okay, never mind. I just didn't want to repeat I had to step away from Mona. I didn't want to repeat.
No, he was addressing me talking about. Ryan was addressing me talking about Blake Harrell wanting to put an emphasis on the outside run, and I asked Ryan about Temple's run defense.
Okay, Axel said, I like to hear how Temple opponents have found the most success against such a strong defensive front or teams working the second level, quick passes to the flats, etc. What are ways that you think that Caton Hauser in East Carolina could be successful?
Honestly, the most success that teams have had is the option teams. I mean, Navy and Army just gashed Temple, and that's just that old school triple option style offense, and that's kind of been what's got Temple this year. They really haven't faced a complete offense yet this year. Oklahoma in the season opener was an anomaly, and a lot of turnovers kind of led that score to being as lopsided as it was. Otherwise, Temple kind of played that game a lot closer than that 51-3 score indicated. I think Temple had 4 or 5 turnovers in that game, and Oklahoma took advantage on every one of those drives on a short field pretty much. And otherwise, I think the defense, when I went back and looked at it, they only truly gave up like 17 points on sustained drives from Oklahoma. And I think you're kind of seeing that now that Oklahoma might not be as hyped up as what they were initially at the start of the season. Otherwise, the games against Army and Navy really is what has exposed Temple this year defensively. I think just that mix of the run, and then you kind of catch somebody off guard with the pass has been the most success that opponents have seen. Otherwise, Temple played Coastal Carolina tough. Coastal was a team that kind of had a run first style where their quarterback really wasn't a threat to beat you with his arm. He was more of an option type quarterback as well, but they contained him pretty well. Then UConn, UConn's just not a very good offensive team, historically never really has been. So they just did fairly well against them. They shut them down in the second half entirely. And then their 2 wins against Utah State and this past weekend against Tulsa. Tulsa's been a run-heavy team as well. Utah State was a team that tried to mix it up a little bit more. But again, their quarterback didn't have the best arm, and he wasn't really a threat to beat you downfield. So it'll be interesting to see now a team that's more of a pass-first team and who has struggled to run the ball a little bit go up against this Temple defense, because the secondary really hasn't been tested much this year. I think I just saw a stat that they're one of the top pass defending teams in the nation. Again, Temple is only allowing about 168 yards passing per game. And I mean, that number obviously is helped by the fact that they faced 2 triple option teams already this year. But, now that they're kind of shifting gears to a team that has seen a lot of success and has a guy that's already over 1,000 yards passing this year, that'll be an interesting thing. Obviously, Jake Garcia now not the quarterback there, but Hauser, it being still, they throw the ball a lot more than what Temple's previous opponents have already done this year.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. We don't really know. I kind of took Bubba. See if you agree. I kind of took today from the press conference from Harrell that Hauser would get the start, but he didn't say for sure. But Bubba, did you kind of? Maybe I'm just picking up on things that ain't there. Would you be surprised if we saw them both Saturday?
I noticed what you were saying. He just said Blake Harrell, that he had to sit down with Caden Hauser and Jake Garcia, coming from the defensive side of the ball. As the defensive coordinator, he's like, sure, I've had an interaction with those guys, but it's largely been a few words in passing, a high five, fist bump, or that kind of thing, like not sitting down and truly getting to know them in the way he has his defensive players, which definitely makes a lot of sense. So now as the head coach, he's said, over these next few days and weeks, he will continue to do that and get to know those guys, so he can be the best head coach possible.
And he also talked about competition at every position, including quarterback. So I would not be surprised if we saw them both, Ryan. So you can run and go tell the Temple coaching stuff. But looking at Temple, your defense, despite a 2-win season, you beat Utah State, you beat Tulsa, 2 bad football teams. But you handled Utah State. You put up a lot of points, or Temple put up a lot of points against Utah State. But overall, your offense has struggled at times. I'm horrible with names. Bubba's is better with the rosters here, but I know you guys have one receiver you target an awful lot. Can you talk about him?
Yeah, so Dante Wright's kind of been the go-to guy for both Temple quarterbacks that have played this year. Kind of, no matter whoever is under center, Dante Wright's been the go-to guy, and which makes sense. He's a guy who brings 5 years of experience at the college level to Temple. He's been there now 2 years after transferring in from Colorado State, where he was an All-American returner there for the Rams, and he put up some decent receiving numbers there. And since coming to Temple, he earned a single digit. That means players respect him and they view him as a true voice and presence in the locker room, as a leader, both on and off the field. He's a guy who leads by example. He's not a very outspoken player, but he's a guy that shows you what you should be doing and when you should be doing it. And I think a lot of players really resonate with that with him. And he's more of a smaller, quick release. He's not going to run deep routes for you, really. He's just going to be your kind of like slot guy that kind of just runs some slants and out routes and try to get the ball in his hands as quick as possible. And he's going to make guys miss. And that's really what he's done this year. He actually missed last week's game against Tulsa due to he started the game, played a little bit in the first quarter, and then left, and then was in street closed by the second half. Not really sure what the injury is. Stan Drayton's been a little vague on injuries this year, and all as he confirmed is it was not an injury that he was dealing with earlier in the year that he was able to play through. But this is something a little different. I suspect the earlier season injury was maybe just, a twisted knee, sprained knee or something, because he was able to straight line, but he wasn't really able to cut. So was wondering if it's that or just, a rolled ankle or something. But now I think it might be a little something more serious where he's kind of, maybe week to week right now, day to day, week to week. Stan said he's questionable to probable for this week. That was what he was said in his Monday press conference about Dante Wright. But so I would say probably trending towards him being able to play this week, depending on the severity of what happens and if there was any setbacks this week in practice. But otherwise, he will be the main guy that East Carolina fans need to worry about when Temple is throwing the ball.
And now, do you think if he's not 100%, he'll still get the same amount of targets?
He might not get the same amount of targets, but I mean, I think he will see the field even when he was dealing with that injury earlier in the year. Like I said, there was the Utah State game where he was kind of limited in what he was able to do. And, Utah, he was out there fielding punts still. And he was able to still run some routes. And he actually did get one play where he kind of snuck behind the Utah State defense and got a nice deep touchdown pass there. So he's a guy that I think, as long as he's able to go, he will be out there, and he'll tell his coach, Coach Drayton, that he wants to be out there and playing with his guys. So I think even if he's not 100%, he'll go, but he might be a little limited in what he's able to do.
Interesting that you're 2-0 with him being banged up. That's the games you've won. It's kind of ironic.
It is.
Ryan, obviously, E.J. Warner, entered the portal, ended up at Rice, which, yes, I know Rice has money, but that still surprised me. Would have expected him to land elsewhere. I'm sure it did you as well by your reaction. But what can you tell us about the Owls at quarterback? I see you've had 3 guys take snaps and didn't have the opportunity to dive into exactly what the situation is there. So tell us about the Temple quarterback room.
Yeah, so I think honestly, and this is no knock to EJ Warner, but honestly, it might have been the best move for Temple that EJ actually did transfer, because for as flashy as EJ's numbers were at times and how accurate he could be of a passer at times, he was at times also holding this offense back a little bit, and his lack of mobility in the pocket and his lack of good decision making at times, I guess you could say, kind of hurt Temple and put them behind the 8 ball in certain games throughout his tenure. And I think that honestly it was probably best for him to go now rather than him stay and potentially still have another 3-9 season. And I know that sounds crazy to say, considering Temple's 2-5 sitting right now outside bowl eligibility, very long shot to get to the bowl eligibility right now. And, very potentially could be another 3-9 season for the Owls. But I think what I've seen this year from Temple's offense has been more consistent. I think that when Temple has played Evan Simon at quarterback, they've been clicking on all cylinders. I think Evan Simon has much more command of the offense. He knows the offense better. And he just has that mobility factor that EJ did not, where he can kind of extend plays with his legs. And if he has to take off, he can take off. Excuse me. So, Evan Simon, well, you mentioned 3 quarterbacks have taken snaps. Forrest Brock was the guy who started the year for Temple at Oklahoma. And that was what I had expected based on what I had seen throughout spring ball, throughout the summer, what I was hearing from players saying, that Forrest was the guy that had the best arm out of the bunch. He was the guy who had the tangibles. But I think similar to what EJ brought to the table, I think sometimes you need to not go with the guy that has the best arm strength or the best accuracy, and you need to go with the guy who's got the experience and the veteran presence. Because when Forrest was under center, unfortunately, Temple's offense was just atrocious looking. And Forrest was turning the ball over left and right, and you can't win football games if you're giving your opponent the ball 3-4 times a game extra. So once they kind of did make that switch to Evan Simon, you've seen this team become more competitive. They're hanging in games, and after the Navy game was when they switched to Evan Simon and since Temple's been competitive. The only outlier was when they took on UConn and Evan Simon was hurt. He was dealing with a shoulder injury that he sustained in the Army game on that Thursday night, and he was banged up, and Temple was kind of forced to go with Forrest Brock, and at points they mixed in Tyler Douglas, who is a young guy as well, for a running package. And unfortunately, at the end of that game, I don't know how many Pirate fans are familiar with how that game ended, but Temple had a 4th and goal at the 1 with 3 seconds remaining in the game, and they put Tyler Douglas in to take the snap because Forrest Brock was also injured and had a wrist injury, and he was not able to take snaps under center. But they put Tyler Douglas in, and he attempted a QB sneak but lost the ball on the snap, and UConn returned the ball 99 yards for a touchdown the other way, which obviously could be something that comes back to bite Temple later in the season, depending on how this back half goes.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you guys, Temple was in a situation to tie the game up with UConn late in the game. That would have been a nice win if you could have got it. UConn's pretty good this year.
Yeah, and that was the thing that was like, it was such unfortunate luck because Temple had executed so well in the second half. They took UConn's defense or offense pretty much out of the equation, except the last touchdown drive that UConn got to take the lead back to 23-20. And, Temple did a nice job of driving down the field. Forrest actually looked like, he was doing a nice job of sustaining a drive for Temple, and he got them down there in the red zone. And then they put Tyler Douglas in on a 4th and 1 at the 10, and he got it by about the skin of his teeth after a review. And, it was the same exact play that then they tried on 4th and goal on the 1. And unfortunately, it looked like Temple's running back had scored 2 plays earlier, but the replay couldn't really show where the ball was, if he kind of crossed the goal line or not. But unfortunately, that's kind of just how Temple's luck has been the last couple years, where, the ball just doesn't seem to bounce their way, or the call doesn't go their way, and then disaster happens right afterwards. And my boss and I have just been talking about this the last couple of weeks. Even though this last week against Tulsa they won, there was a play where Temple's receiver caught a ball, gets tackled, but he's laying on top of a Tulsa defender, fumbles. Temple's receiver picks it up, runs it down to the inside the 10-yard line. They refs review it. You can clearly see the guys laying on top of another player, and they overturn it. And it's just like, how is that getting overturned? Why is the ball just not bouncing in Temple's favor? And that's kind of just, what happens. Unfortunately, though, if you're a team that's struggling, you kind of have to find ways to overcome that adversity.
Well, we know about weird overturns at Tulsa. Look back at the 2020 season. Good God. I don't know if you remember that game.
Yeah. Dial 911.
I do.
It was 4 penalties in a row? 4 bad calls.
It was bad. It was bad on the last drive. They did everything they could to keep us from winning that game. I mean, it was. I don't want to. Yeah, I'm never one to say officials are intentionally cheating, but it sure seemed like it that night.
Well, remember Scott Van Pelt, with bad beats. He and Stanford Steve, really just talked about how East Carolina got screwed in that one, and that one on social media became known as the Tulsa screw job. But Ryan, what you said about EJ Warner makes sense because, outside of seeing a full game against East Carolina, I just seen highlights. And so you can understand why, after he went 45 of 63 for 527 and 5 touchdowns against us, why I felt the way I did as far as that.
And if you look at his numbers at Rice, he's gotten worse, and he's gotten worse every year.
It surprised me,
fortunately, and that was the thing. I thought, him going to Rice was a good team last year, and now they're worse. And that just proves my point that I think he's worse than JT Daniels, who Rice had last year. And they just have looked atrocious offensively this year, and he's just a guy that can't really do much with a team that doesn't have a run game.
But a few minutes ago, I'm kind of shifting gears. You were talking about the production of Dante Wright. Johnny Robertson chimes in on Facebook saying Dante Wright is rated by Pro Football Focus as the 59th best slot wide receiver, out of 1,002 graded players at that position. So very impressive. And, for the season, He has over 40 catches, 42 receptions, 517 yards, and 4 touchdowns, a long of 91. Who did that come against?
That was the one against Utah State where he had the 91-yarder. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that was the thing. Before he was hurt Saturday, I was thinking, he might actually have a shot to be only the second Temple receiver ever to go over 1,000 yards. Obviously, that's still possible if he has a couple big games down the stretch, but it's going to be a long shot now, I guess, now that you only have 5 games left, and he's kind of week to week as far as his injury status, and we know he's playing banged up a little bit.
Ryan,
other than
go ahead, Bubba.
Other than Dante Wright, talk about some of the other guys that Temple has, from a skill standpoint.
Yeah, so same kind of thing as the last couple years. Temple is a team that likes to use its tight ends and utilize them in the passing game. They like to get some mismatches there with some of their athletic tight ends, and they've kind of really played a factor, especially down in the red zone for the Owls. Temple's got several very good tight ends that you can kind of expect to see a lot from. Landon Morris is a guy who had a really big game against Tulsa this past weekend, that's really the first time we've seen extensive action from him. And it was nice to see. He's a guy that was originally at Syracuse and then Utah and then transferred to Syracuse. And, was a guy that brought that P5 experience. He had to sit a year last year because of having a double transfer in the same year. But he's, kind of now stepped up into that role that, David Martin Robinson had that at Temple the last couple of years. Obviously, David Martin Robinson now with the Tennessee Titans. So just shows that, kind of pedigree that Temple's trying to produce there at the tight end position. They got a kid from Britain, Peter Clark, who's a really good player, really tough-nosed player, likes to jaw with other teams, players, and kind of, smack talk a little bit in the game, but he does it all in a good way. And he's been a real red zone threat this year. He has 2 touchdowns, I think, on 3 catches this year in the red zone. And then you got JDP, James Della Pesca, who's a guy that's just kind of their every down tight end who you see a lot, but then they try to, disguise some things where he looks like a blocker and then sneaks out to be a receiver. So those tight ends I expect heavily to be featured in the offense again this week. If Dante Wright can't go, Temple's kind of thin at receiver. And surprisingly enough, even though they went out and got some guys from the portal, a lot of these guys that they got were unproven receivers or not really even receivers. In fact, one of their starting receivers, Ashton Allen. He was on the USC track team in the spring. He had not played football since high school. After doing track at USC for the last couple of years, and he decided, he wanted to give a shot to go back and play football, and Temple was willing to give him a scholarship, and he came in, and he's been a guy that, gets a couple catches a game, and he can make plays. Obviously being a track guy, he has legitimate 4.2, 4.3 speed. Would like to see him actually get a shot where he can actually catch the ball in the open field and see how fast he actually is, because we really haven't seen that yet. But they also have a guy in like Kaija Holloway, who was a former quarterback recruit at UCLA, who then went to the JUCO level and was playing receiver there. They went out and brought him in. They ran a trick play with him against Tulsa this past weekend where he actually got to throw the ball, and it resulted in like a 30-yard gain for the Owls. So that was nice to see them using him now as a little bit of a versatile weapon in their offense. But really, other than that, Temple doesn't have another top receiver. Antonio Jones is a guy from Grambling that they brought in with their new wide receiver coach, Tyron Carrier, who was familiar with him with being at Grambling before. He's been a guy that, can produce here and there, but he's not a guy that they're targeting as much as like Dante Wright. They're trying to kind of spread the ball around a little bit more. And that was a remarkable thing about that Tulsa game, is that even though they didn't have Dante Wright, Evan Simon completed a pass to 13 different receivers. So that was a very impressive number to spread the wealth around and, just kind of distribute the ball where it needed to be to who it needed to go to. And no real guy was the focus or the focal point of the offense, which kind of made that offense a little bit more productive, I think, in that game, rather than having them opponents key on Dante Wright all the time when he's on the field.
Brian, what are your thoughts on the Temple offensive line and how do they handle pressure?
Yeah, I think they've been up and down this year. Definitely they're not as experienced as they have been in the years past, and they've had to make some switches there, and now they're playing a very young offensive line again. Some of the older guys who started the year, who we thought would be, at this point, experienced, solid staples along that offensive line, had some really bad performances earlier in the year, and they got benched. And now it's, again, a very young offensive line that had guys that needed to be plug and played right away. And, they had to produce right away. And so they still sometimes show their age, not in the good way, unfortunately. I think that they've been sacked more this year already than EJ was sacked the last 2 years combined. So that's not a great sign, but in a way, they've also done better than what they have in the last 2 years, just in the fact that they're a little bit more athletic so that they can move with the pocket if they need to. They can move with the quarterback when he does need to roll out. I think they've done a better job run blocking for the most part than they have in years past, even though Temple's rush attack is still averaging only 2.8 yards per carry. That's something that still has struggled mightily, and I'm not sure what the issue has been there, considering, Temple's head coach comes from being a running backs coach, and they just still can't seem to find that recipe for success in the rushing attack. And Temple really hasn't been able to do that since Rod Carey was the head coach, really since his first year as the head coach, when then they had Ray Davis there. And obviously Ray now being with the Buffalo Bills, that might just speak to the fact that he was that good.
Yeah, no doubt. When you look at this game, the line opened at East Carolina -10. It didn't stay there long. It quickly went to East Carolina -7, down to 6.5 at some places. I expect this to be a low-scoring game. I think the over/under is 49, maybe. I'd probably maybe even take the under. I expect this to be a slugfest. Is that kind of how you see it?
Yeah, I kind of think of this very similar to last week's game against Tulsa for Temple, in that these are two struggling teams. They're two not great teams in the American, and, bad teams tend to play bad against one another still. It's not like all of a sudden you're going to find the secret sauce that you're going to go out and drop 50 on an opponent unless there's a lot of turnovers by one team. So I agree with you in that regard, where I think this is another low-scoring game. I think this stays in the 20s for both teams, if that. It's going to be a defensive battle for the most part, and whichever team, doesn't make more mistakes, that's probably the team that's going to come out on top on Saturday.
Yeah, no doubt. It is homecoming at Dowdy Ficklin. I think the crowd will be what am I trying to say? The crowd will be thank you, re-energized. With the dismissal of Mike Houston, I think Blake Harrell will bring some juice. But that'll last about a quarter. And then you got to turn around and play football. So I'm with you. I think whoever makes the least amount of mistakes wins the football game.
Yeah, and I think that it favors East Carolina in this regard, because it is going to be a hostile environment. ECU fans always do turn out, especially for a homecoming game. Temple hasn't won a game on the road in almost 3 years now. Stan Drayton's not won a game on the road. So that's also why that UConn game really hurt, because that would have got that monkey off the back, per se. That Temple would have finally gotten that win on the road that they haven't gotten under Stan Drayton, and now here we are again. Temple's got to go on the road to the most probably hostile environment that it's going to play in this season, other than Oklahoma, on a homecoming game the week after, Mike Houston gets fired. And honestly, probably would have been better for Temple for them to keep Mike Houston until after this week. I do have a feeling that, even though the players really liked and respected Mike Houston, I think that, like you mentioned, that Blake Harrell's just going to have them energized and ready to play on Saturday.
No doubt. And also the fact that here's a chance, instead of, you hear, Ryan, the rumblings of people saying that the players, may lay down because they love Houston. But to me, if you love the coach and they were wrong for firing, let's say the mindset of the players. So people that are listening and watching, hear me out. If it's the player who says that was wrong what you did, I hope y'all are happy, like you see some of the tweets Go out there and play your butts off for your coach, the guy that gave you the scholarship, the guy who was there for you personally, professionally, the whole 9 yards. We know how a relationship between a coach and a player is. It's a special bond. So go out there like it's and I've said it a lot this year, this is a bowl game for us, because right now we're playing every week. We're going to be playing for a bowl game, because you can't say, as you know, Ryan, oh, we don't have to worry about this game. We don't have to worry about this. No, when you're East Carolina and we're at the bottom of the barrel right now, so to speak, every game is always important, but it's more, I guess, like a microscope on it. Now, how do you get to 6? Same thing with Temple. How do you get to 6 wins or 7 wins? You can't take anybody for granted.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's my worry is, that these players are going to get hyped up and, they're going to be looking for some payback, especially after the last 2 weeks. They've gotten their butts kicked 2 weeks in a row. And, Temple might be coming in feeling a little good now after they won. And like I said, this Temple's just not played well on the road under Stan Drayton. So until they prove otherwise that they can play on the road, it's hard to bet in favor of Temple come Saturday.
And Ryan, would you say you don't know which Temple team you're going to get? The inconsistency of the team this year, it seems like there's been moments where you're like, okay, this Temple team, and then there's other weeks that they don't look as good.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think I have a pretty good feel for what this Temple team is. I think other than the fact that Oklahoma is just, got players that are better than Temple based on NIL, and Army and Navy are just two really good football teams. I think Temple's a team that can compete with, that kind of mid-class team in college football right now, and they're going to be competitive with really anybody that's in that spectrum. It's just whether can they put together a full 60 minutes. And that's just been the struggle that you mentioned with the consistency. Can they play a full 60-minute game with no mistakes or self-inflicted penalties or self-inflicted wounds that are going to prevent them from winning this game? And, like I mentioned at the UConn game, the defense makes one more stop. They're not even in that situation where they have to go for it on 4th and 1 from the 1 yard line. If they don't turn the ball over inside their own 10 against Coastal Carolina at home, they probably win that game against Coastal, or at least it's maybe 21-20 at the end instead of 28-20, and that changes the whole way you call plays at the end of that game. Instead of having to, drive the length of the field and get a touchdown, you could go for a game-winning field goal. So, that changes the whole complexion of things, and I think that's where Temple needs to really focus is, can it limit its own mistakes, and can it put together a full consistent minutes of 60 minutes of football on both sides of the football?
Yeah, East Carolina Temple very similar in not playing a full 60 minutes. Opportunities you guys had against Coastal, against Connecticut, we had against Liberty, against Appalachian State. So very similar situations. You guys are sitting there with 2 wins. We're sitting here with 3 wins. One of ours is against an FCS opponent. You have wins over Utah State and Tulsa. We got wins over UTSA and Old Dominion. So very similar resumes, really, when you look at it. I think it's going to be a very evenly matched ball game. I think it's going to be a slugfest for 60 minutes. So looking forward to it. Should be fun.
And taking a look at the Owls defensively, giving up a little over 32 points per game, right at 380 yards, 210 through the on the ground, and then 170 in the air. But as you mentioned, games against Army and Navy, they definitely distort that. You also had the game against Oklahoma. From a point standpoint, with the short fields that you already referenced. But what can you tell us about Temple on that side of the ball? And then, if you would, also reference Tyquan King and what he's brought to the table. Johnny Gardner was mentioning that because he was, of course, a former East Carolina Pirate after coming to ECU from North Carolina A&T.
Yeah, so I think that the defense has taken great strides, and they've played phenomenal the last couple games. Like I mentioned, I think that for as much hate as Temple defensive coordinator Everett Withers gets, and fans calling for his job all the time, I think they really have to credit him for being someone who had went out this offseason and rebuilt this defense to be a team that actually is able to stop people and get off the field when they need to at times. And they did it at all three levels. And I give absolute credit to Withers and his staff for being able to do that and go out, especially at the JUCO ranks, and bring guys in that can come in and play right away and compete at the FBS level and compete at a high level, and, go to the portal and find guys that needed homes who could come in and contribute right away and make an impact on this team. And they fit the system, and they've done that very well. You mentioned Taekwon, obviously being one of those guys. Taekwon was not a guy that was playing a whole lot in the early parts of the season, and then an injury happened in practice to one of Temple's starting linebackers, Eric Stewart, who was one of those JUCO guys that I mentioned, that cost him basically his season. And they end up switching DJ Woodbury from his position over to where Stewart was playing, and they plugged Taekwon in, and Taekwon has been a stud ever since. I mean, he leads the team in tackles right now with 62. And that's pretty much in like 4.5, 5 games instead of 7 for Temple. So that should just, if you do the math, that breaks down to, he's averaging double-digit tackles pretty much every time he steps on the field right now for Temple. So he's been definitely a difference maker there. And, having 2 really good linebackers in Woodbury and King has helped tremendously in this Temple defense. So that just shows, I think, how good Everett Withers has been able to identify talent and his staff. Obviously give credit to Chris Woods, the linebackers coach as well for Temple, that he was able to go out and find some of these guys and, see, do you have a chip on your shoulder? We want you here if you have a chip on your shoulder. And that's kind of how Taekwon, I think, is feeling coming into this game. He didn't say anything bad about East Carolina, but, he wants to go out and take care of business against this former team. And he wants to show, that he's happy where he's at now, and he's ready to play and make an impact at Temple, and he's going to want to obviously come away with a win against his former program. But going back to some of the other aspects of the defense, Temple's secondary last year was atrocious, and even though East Carolina didn't play Temple last year, Temple's secondary was just getting pounded week after week after week, and the corners could not keep up with any opponent's receivers, and teams would just attack that relentlessly. And if it wasn't one corner, if it was the other, and if it wasn't the safety, it was the other safety, and it was just everybody in that secondary. And so far this year, Temple really hasn't had to worry about guys getting past them. And the last 2 weeks, I think my boss was the guy who wrote a story about this, or posted on our message boards, that the last 2 weeks against UConn and Tulsa, Temple has absolutely shut down opponents' top receiving targets. UConn has a guy, Skylar Bell, I believe, who was averaging over 100 yards a game, and he had 1 catch for 8 yards against them. And this past week against Tulsa's top receiver was targeted, I think, 8 times, and he only had 3 catches for 27 yards or something like that. So that just shows how Temple has been able to take away those number 1 options the last couple of weeks, and how much improved that secondary has been. And I already referenced, and Bubba, you just referenced it, that now they're only giving up 170 passing yards per game. So now I'm intrigued to see now that, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to face a pass-heavy team in East Carolina, a quarterback that actually can throw the ball, whether it's Hauser or Garcia, what that's going to look like this week. But even up front, they went out and got a couple guys that were just big bodies and mean players that they needed to clog the middle, and they've done a wonderful job in that. And Latrell Jean's been a absolute game changer for them at the nose tackle position opposite Demerick Morris. He's a guy who transferred in conference from FAU to Temple for his last year, and he's done phenomenal. He came in during the summer and immediately earned a single digit. So I think that just speaks to how highly he was regarded by Temple's locker room almost immediately. And then obviously you have 2 really good pass rushers in DeJuan Black and Trey Thomas on the edge, who teams are starting to really struggle with having to defend. DeJuan Black obviously is the guy who is the threat, but now that teams are having to kind of key in on him and double him, it's opening up a lot of opportunities for Trey on the other side. And that was something we were able to ask DeJuan and Trey the last after the Tulsa win on Saturday was, just how much of an impact has it been having DeJuan Black after he had to sit for the first 4 games this year. And Trey just said, it's all the difference in the world just now that they're having to defend a guy who's probably the best athlete on Temple's team in DeJuan Black, who just is mean, and he gets after the quarterback and he's coming after you every time he's on the field. You see that. But now that they have to defend 2 really good pass rushers, it's been a struggle the last couple of weeks for those opposing teams.
Shifting to special teams, let's start with your place kicker. Actually had gotten a question or 2 here in our comment section, including one from Axel regarding the young man, 9 for 11, including 6 for 7 beyond 40 yards, including a long of 64 yards.
Maddox Trujillo, he's a guy that Temple staff went out and identified in the portal. Adam Shire went out and got him from Austin P. A kid that, had some decent numbers there. He was I believe a 2.5, 3-year starter down there at Austin P. But he obviously wanted to showcase what he could do on the FBS level. So came to Temple with his last year, and, he was a guy that we didn't know necessarily if he was going to win the job immediately, because during Temple's spring game, Temple has a walk-on kicker, Carl Harden, who went 4 of 4, I believe, in the spring game with like 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts, and he had some distance on his kicks too. And we're like, okay, maybe Harden's going to be the guy, and this guy that they're bringing in might not even have a shot. But we heard rumblings that no, this kid has a big leg. You're going to see it, so just wait. And he did not disappoint. That game against Utah State, when he kicked the 64-yarder, was very exciting in the press box, we'll put it that way, just to see a guy be able to do that that's not in the NFL. Obviously, implications for that for Temple was huge, just because it put them on SportsCenter. It gave them, a spotlight on ESPN for a kicker breaking not only Temple's program record that had been set back in the 70s, but it also broke Lincoln Financial Field's record, and it's now the longest kick in the history of that stadium, breaking Jake Elliott's record for the Eagles. So, that sort of publicity was huge for Temple, I think, just in that. And then he went out and did it against UConn a couple weeks ago and hit another 60-yarder. So, or was it Army or UConn? I forget which one, but hit another 60-yarder. And, just, I think that has earned him NFL looks. And if not looks, he probably he's getting signed to a practice squad somewhere, at least for a tryout. Because, you can't teach leg strength like that when you're hitting consistently from, like Bubba mentioned, from 40 plus yards. It's quite remarkable. And he's been a phenomenal addition, and obviously having that sort of power in your kicking game really opens up a lot, and you kind of feel safe at a certain yardage point to kind of take some shots. And Temple's been able to do that now, because now they know they have a reliable and steady kicker that they haven't had really in a couple years.
How much wind was there? Just out of curiosity, on the 60 and 64 yarders.
The 64-yarder, there was no wind really on that one. From where we were, he was kicking towards the closed end of the stadium at the link, so it was the easier end to kick towards. But honestly, the week prior, on one of his missed field goals, actually the one that he did miss, I think it was from like 50 some. Honestly, that one would have been good from probably 66, 67. He kicked it so much better, and it had so much distance on it when it crossed the crossbar, but it just kind of drifted right on him the whole way, or drifted left on him the whole way when he kicked it. So that was the one that was disappointing, because that probably would have been the first one that he would have made if it would have went through. But but yeah, the 60-yarder there again wasn't really much wind. It looked pretty good. That 64-yarder one though, that just barely made it because it hit the crossbar.
Just received the comment from John White saying Maddox Trujillo that on the NFL big board, he's number 3 in terms of kickers.
That's good to know. So yeah, and the good thing was there was an NFL scout in building that day. They've been hard to come by at Temple here this year, but one of the Dolphin scouts, I believe, was in-house that day, or it was Dolphins or Panthers. So they were able to see it live, and that'll be interesting to see how that ends up playing out for him come the end of the season. Like I said, I think he earned himself probably at the very least a tryout with the team, if not maybe a roster spot come the spring.
And Ryan, the Panthers need a lot of help right now. So, in fact,
Yeah,
by the way, because of the Panther situation, I'm not making fun of them being our home team or local team, but I do believe that an owner should be kicked out of a league if he's acting as crazy, throwing drinks on people, and I mean firing people left and right. I mean, finally the Charlotte FC makes the playoffs this year, but they had a coach every single year, something like 6-7 coaches in a handful of years between the two franchises he owns. And just because you own a team and a billionaire doesn't mean that you are smart enough to run a team.
I agree with that, and I'm sure if I reached out to maybe some of those former Temple coaches that were on that Panther staff a couple years ago, they probably would agree with you as well that was a debacle down there when Matt Rule was hired as the head coach, and I just feel that organization unfortunately is in a bad state because of the owner, like you said. And I can't imagine being a Panthers fan right now.
Sounds like Tony Khan.
Good point. Touche.
And speaking of Matt Rule, he's seemingly doing what I thought he would at Nebraska. They really did take it on the chin last weekend against the Hoosiers. Indiana 56 and Nebraska 7. Definitely thought Indiana would win that game. Did not envision that happening. Unfortunately, I didn't even realize this. I just seen the score of the game, unable to watch any of it, that Indiana had lost their quarterback. So have you happened to see any idea how long that young man is out?
I did not.
No, I don't know.
But just intrigued there, here in, I think it's maybe 3 weeks, they headed the Horseshoe, and the way they've played, they're certainly capable of making that one interesting, hoping he's back for that matchup. But
my favorite thing for that whole thing was the reaction from Indiana's head coach when Signetti, when somebody asked him earlier in the week about that being a tough game for them and all, and he's just like, look at my resume, all I do is win. And because they were questioning him about taking on Nebraska and whether
right, yeah, I saw that comment.
I just laughed at that, and that kind of gives the Mike Tomlin vibe from Sunday night or Monday or yesterday morning when they said about him, making the QB switch, and he's like, well, that's why I'm well compensated. I love that type of attitude from a head coach, just because I think they're like, well, yeah, I get paid the money to make these decisions, not the media.
One more football question specifically here from Justice Bradburn. He asked this a few minutes ago on YouTube, saying, what is Temple's best position group?
Right now, it's the defensive ends. I kind of already alluded to it a little bit where, I think you have a guy in DeJuan Black, who's a guy that will be playing on Sundays come the end of the season, despite, some issues he's had throughout his collegiate career at Florida, and then having to go JUCO, and then going back to Florida and ending up at Temple, and some of the issues he's had at Temple. I think that he's a legitimate freak athlete, and some team's going to give him a shot because he is such a disruptive pass rusher. And then a guy in Trey Thomas, who, again, like I said, he's really kind of coming into his own. He's come into his own the last 2 years, having played alongside DeJuan now, and they're just so disruptive together when they're on the field at the same time that it's almost impossible for opposing offensive lines to have to defend both of them at the same time. So I would say that definitely the defensive end position has been their strongest group as of late. If I had to say for the season overall, I would say the linebackers with, like I mentioned, Tyquan King, DJ Woodbury, and just some of the JUCO guys behind them that have been able to rotate in and they've not really seen a drop off in that position, despite having lost 2 guys to the NFL in Jordan McGee and Yvonne Rigby last year.
Something that is now synonymous with NCAA and college athletics over the last 3 seasons is certainly NIL. Robert Dedrick on YouTube says, where is Temple's NIL situation?
The toilet. It's the simple answer. It's getting better. I shouldn't completely say that it's terrible, but Temple was very late to the game to get involved in NIL, or maybe take it seriously as some other schools did, or maybe they just didn't have the donors. But yeah, it's not in a great position compared to, obviously the Power 5 schools, or the Power 4 schools now. It's still weird to say Power 4. But it's in a bad spot even compared to the teams on the same level of them, as like the East Carolinas of the world, of the USFs of the world, the teams in conference that they should be on the similar level to, but it's bad. Temple's tried to get better. They're trying to get a little more creative and out there in the market, and trying to get some more sponsorships for players, and it's starting to improve, but you're not going to Temple for NIL money is the best way I can put it. It's you're coming to Temple to make a name for yourself, because like I mentioned, you have a chip on your shoulder and you just want to prove that you are capable of playing at this level of football. And I think, unfortunately, it was, again, the ball didn't bounce in Temple's favor when all of this NIL stuff came about, and Temple was just down at that point. And unfortunately, they've not been able to really bounce back from being down. And I think once Temple is able to, if they are able to bounce back and start winning some football games a little more consistently, I think that's when you'll see the NIL money start to come in, at least for football. Basketball seems to be in a better position with NIL money. But I think that also stems from Temple historically just having been a basketball school.
Yep.
So I think people are more willing to donate to the basketball program rather than the football program, because it is more a little bit with that older generation, that they're the ones that have the money right now, that they remember Temple being a top 5 team, and they're ranked every year and they're beating ranked teams. And I think they're more willing to do that and see Temple return to glory on the court rather than on the gridiron.
Nice segue there to another hoops question from Johnny Gardner. Says, Ryan, since we're 2 weeks away from opening tip in hoops, can you provide us with a quick preview of Adam Fisher's ball club? Won 16 games a year ago, but still just 5-13 within the league. And additionally, give us your thoughts on Jordan Riley, who joined the ECU program.
But they did play for the conference tournament title. We'll say
exactly.
Well,
yeah, kind of peaked there late.
Yeah, so I think this is obviously a big year for Adam Fisher. I think this is the year that they need to go out and show that last year's conference tournament run wasn't a fluke, where they do end up playing UAB for the conference tournament title there down in Fort Worth, and they actually are going to be a team that's going to be a competitive team in the league this year. And honestly, I was surprised when the preseason poll came out and Temple was picked where they were. I thought they'd be up higher. I thought they would be in like that 4 to 5 range, and I think they were down in that mid tier 7-8 range, and I was honestly a little surprised by that. So not sure what some of the other coaches in the league were voting on there when they did that, and what other media members were voting on based on. But I think they're going to be a team that's going to rely heavily on their guard play. They're going to have 3 very good starting guards, and they got 2 of them from the transfer portal, in Jamal Mashburn, obviously son of Jamal Mashburn, who played in the NBA. And then you also have Lynn Greer the third, who's now following in his father's footsteps of playing at Temple, who transferred in from St. Joe's in the offseason. So looking forward to seeing those 2 play alongside of one another. The question for me is going to be the depth, whether they actually have sustainable depth on the bench. They have a pretty solid starting 5, in my opinion, but there's still some production that needs to be replaced there with, like you mentioned, having lost a scorer like Jordan Riley was. But where Jordan Riley didn't succeed was on the defensive end of the floor. And I think that's what they're kind of hoping for, is the trade-off, is that even though they lose that offensive production and Jordan Riley's ability to score the basketball, they're going to gain on the defensive end of the court, because Jordan Riley is a guy who, as much as I hate to say it, is not a good defender at all and really doesn't play much defense. He kind of plays that NBA style of ball where it's offense first and defense maybe 25% of the time. So, that's kind of where I see Temple playing. They have a pretty good schedule this year. I think it's a very winnable schedule where they have some nice games against some lower level mid majors where they can pick up some wins, but then they also have some competitive games against like Buffalo. They have UMass. They have Florida State on their schedule as well. So that'll be an interesting test for them at a neutral site. I think they also get Boston College earlier in the year back to back with Florida State. So that'll be again another interesting test to just see where they're at against some of the teams in the ACC. So I'm looking forward to that. Obviously, in the league, I think the league has downgraded since the departure of Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. So I think it's a little more open. And obviously, Memphis is Memphis, and they tend to Memphis every year and choke some games away and never live up to the hype that usually they are. So I think there's definitely potential for wins this year within the league that may not have been wins last year in Adam Fisher's first season. So I look forward to that. And Big Five Classic's going to be a thing again this year in Philadelphia. I don't know what Pirate fans know about that, but last year, basically the Big Five schools determined that they were going to do a tournament in season to determine the Big Five champion from now on, rather than doing a round robin in season. So now the culmination's at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia in December. So that'll be interesting to see. Obviously, Temple couldn't get a game with Villanova there if the wins and losses play out the correct way as we would expect it to. If not, they'll probably get a decent St. Joe's team in the championship game if they beat LaSalle and Drexel, which I fully expect them to. So it'll be a pretty good non-conference slate. And then when we get into league play, you never know. It's really, like I said, wide open in the league, in my opinion.
Craig Doucette says Pat's, Geno's. Which one of those options you see there on the screen? And he corrected his spelling of Geno's.
Yeah, he lives in Philly. He's not going to say Pat's or Geno's. He's going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, no, neither Pat's nor Geno's. If I had to pick between Pat's and Geno's, I'm going Geno's all day. But I like Jim's on South Street. They just reopened after they had a fire a couple of years ago that closed them.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I remember Jim's.
Yeah, Jim's there. I think it was actually in the apartment building above Jim's that caused the fire, and it unfortunately closed them for a little bit. But now they're back open. They opened again over the summer. Jim's is my favorite, but I like Delisandro's too. Delisandro's is a very good cheesesteak. I've heard other people say that Delisandro's is one of the top, if not top two in the city. But I've not had enough other than Delisandro's and Jim's to say that there's better.
There you go.
All right. And have you had Eastern North Carolina barbecue?
I have not yet. I still need to. And I was hoping to come this weekend, but family event popped up and I'm booked this weekend. So I will not be, unfortunately, coming down to Greenville, but I want to come down again because this was the year I was actually planning on coming back down and getting that East Carolina barbecue. And I wanted to go to get some wings again and just enjoy Greenville a little bit.
Well, I hate that, but tell everybody before we let you go, as far as Owls Daily 24/7. I know you guys do a great job, just like your counterpart for East Carolina, Stephen Igo, our good friend with Hoist the Colors. Tell everybody about those of us that have a subscription. I believe you can actually go on the free part of Owls Daily, right? 24/7.
Correct. Yes. So we now have merged our message boards to be one message board. So probably very similar to how Steven has his, because I think my boss Sean took some inspiration from how Steven had his message board set up. We have one message board now where you have free content as well as paid content all on the same board. That way it's all visible to everybody at the time. And if you decide one day you would like to subscribe and check out some of that paid content, you can. If you have a subscription to Hoist the Colors, I believe that should transfer over to our Owls Daily because it's all on the 24/7 Sports Network. So even if you're only interested in Temple for this week and checking out what we're putting out for this week's previews and lead up to the game, you can always pop on over and check out the paid articles then on our site, owlsdaily.com. And as always, you can follow me on Twitter at RyanWallen247 or my boss, Sean Pastor, the Temple Owls Guru, at Temple Owls Daily on Twitter.
And I have one final question for you. Have you watched Mr. McMahon, the episode's limited series on Netflix?
I have not.
It is really good. You'll like it. Kyle, have you seen it?
I would recommend skipping watching it and go listen to the 5-hour Jim Cornette review of the Mr. McMahon documentary.
I haven't done that yet. Okay. I've already watched it. I'll have to do that with McMahon. Ryan, man, thank you so much. I know you're going over time. You're always generous. Thank you so much. And I hope we can talk some hoops here pretty soon.
All right. Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Man. Have a good one.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Bye. All right. As always, we appreciate Ryan being on the show.
So Bubba is gone away. I'm assuming he's coming back. Matt is supposed to be joining us.
I think I thought he was joining us. I think Bubba has dad duties, looks like. So it's just down to whoever's going to win the money. It's going to come down to me or Kyle, the money man barber. So the big boss man. So
Matt and Bubba are both gone. So is Bubba going to, or is Matt going to join us?
I don't know. I don't.
All right, I guess we'll just quickly go to wrap things up. I thought Matt was going to join us after Ryan left. He said he was going to, but maybe not. Just wanted to quickly address real fast what happened the other night on the podcast. We had a troll. We will not mention him by name. Who caused a lot of havoc here on the podcast. I apologize to anybody that was offended by my language, but I do want to make this very clear. When the show is archived, what comes up in live chat, particularly if it's posted on YouTube, is not archived in the show. There was a lot of people who watched the show in archive and was not aware of the things that the troll was saying, derogatory comments about myself, and even more so about my wife. And so it looked like, if you were watching the show in archive, that I was attacking someone for no reason. That is not the case, and I wanted to make that very clear. And just in general, other people making derogatory comments towards me. Look, I'm fine with criticism. I'm fine with talking trash to me. But get your facts straight if you're going to. But again, for anybody who was offended by my language, I do apologize, but that is all I apologize for.
All right. Yeah, it was, I think, as far as that day, it was emotionally, as far as the emotional, nobody wants to see, obviously, a coach be fired. But anyway.
Well, that particular person was a total troll.
Had nothing to do with had nothing to do with
it. And he also has done that to clip Brock in the past. So he went out of his way, particularly. The show got deleted because he continued to try to look like that I was the one per tube in the comment section. Because again, you could not see the live comments that happened during the show. But I just wanted to get that out there and kind of clear that up. But that's why that episode has been deleted, because a lot of things are out of context. The second half of the show without the ability to see the live comments.
No doubt, and we want everybody to know that we try really hard to be a family-friendly show. I know Kyle does too, and it was a situation where the best thing.
Somebody provoked me that I should not let provoke me, but when people are making comments about your wife, if you're any kind of man, you're gonna get ready to kick some ass.
No doubt, and also the same thing, like if he were to talk about my mom. My dad, for that matter. I know you're very close to your dad still, and
absolutely,
your mom is awesome, and we miss her a lot. But
definitely
that's the uncalled for, and like you said, it's the same thing, Kyle, when I have being a politician and my children didn't want me. Well, maybe they wanted me to run for office, but they're innocent. They didn't. It wasn't their decision, really. Ultimately, I put my hat in the ring, and so whenever I've had it happen a couple times, it's sad people in the world that put down my children, and they had nothing to do with.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah,
That's
but,
yeah.
but anyway, that's but not. I'm just saying I can relate to you in some respects because
yes.
like that makes you
It's
angry.
ridiculous to go after anybody's child. Your children are small anyway. It's not like they're teenagers. You have young children and they're
Yeah,
good kids. So I don't know why anybody would go after your kids. And
it's
then
like
also some other
99.10
comments,
people.
some other comments that were made, again on the YouTube channel about, I addressed that. I won't even get into that again. Some other comments that were made that I addressed on my personal Facebook page that I won't even get to up here. But
Thank you, Justin. We appreciate you very much, man. That's
yeah,
really nice.
and I encourage anyone who I'll just say this and then I'll leave it here. I encourage anyone that truthfully has a problem with me, not a troll, but if you truthfully have a problem with me, you're welcome to message me on Facebook or come up to me at the game. I'm very open about where I sit, north side, handicapped ramp, because I'm visually impaired. If you have truthfully need something you want to discuss with me, and you're not a troll, feel free to come up to me at a game or message me on Facebook. I'll be happy to talk to you. We can discuss our differences civilly or however you want to do it.
All right. Here's a great thing. It's I don't always agree with Kyle, but I have mad respect for what he has to say. A true pirate. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's another thing, and then we'll let it go. Is that Kyle and I are good friends. We don't always agree on things, and it's okay that I don't. He doesn't have to agree with everything I believe in, or vice versa. That's just crazy for the society we live in. That I have to agree with everything with Kyle, or Kyle has. And
Nah.
you can be close friends. Look, they're my mom and dad that I'm like two. They're like two of my best friends. My children, my sister, my nephews. There are people that are 7 people besides myself I'm very close to, and they don't agree with everything, and that's okay. I'm not going to say, well, I'm sorry, mom and dad, I don't agree with you anymore, or my sister or nephew. So it's just crazy. But ultimately, like Justin said, just the best thing that we learned as of Sunday night is just ignore the trolls. We
Yeah,
don't have.
ignore the trolls, absolutely, and particularly with the fact that anything in the live chat that's not put up on the screen, like he just did with Justin's comment, is gone. So when you address it, it's out of context, and so when it really put me in a bad situation for people that watched it after the fact, it just made me look like a lunatic that was just having an outburst of Tourette's. So but so in some of the comments, in the on the YouTube afterwards towards me, were very uncalled for about my weight, about my vision, etc. Personal attacks that have nothing to do with anything I say. If you want to talk about my opinions on things, that's perfectly fine. But any personal attacks, I'm gonna attack back, but I will do it now in a different way. And again, anybody that's a regular listener that was offended by my language, I'll still use colorful language, just me. But I got very over the top the other night, and I was provoked into it, and should not have let a troll provoke me in such a manner.
It's all good. Hey, it's all good. We still have a lot of viewers or listeners. Appreciate y'all very much, and we're going to continue to do this show as long as you'll have us, and nothing will stop us from doing that. And good luck to the Pirates. It's going to be a good game. And the final thing I will say is, final thing I have is, Kyle, is I want everybody, I know you probably agree with me on this, the people that wanted Mike Houston fired, you got your wish. He's fired. And Blake Harrell's going to do a great job, I think, with these kids. Whether they win the games or not, he's going to do a great job for sure. Let's get behind Blake Harrell. These guys are putting in, the coaches and players put in many, many hours. And we may not agree with the way certain things happen or whatever. Go out there this Saturday. It's homecoming. Get your tickets. Go ahead. If you don't have tickets, get your tickets, 1-800-ECU, or you can simply go anytime to ECUPirates.com. Go there, support the Pirates, and I think it's going to be a great game. By the way, it's our preview, so I almost forgot, Kyle, before we let you go, do you have a prediction?
I'm all over the place with this one. Ryan does a really good job of talking up Temple and pointing out their good points. So I'm not as confident as I was. I was really, I do think the defense in particular will come out fired up. This one's hard to gauge with a coaching change. Temple is playing better football the last couple of weeks. I'm going to say the Pirates get it done 23-20. I think it's going to be a nail biter down to the wire. I do a couple of things I do want to touch on before we go. When we'll get into the coaching search more in depth, we kind of need to reboot to do that over. But if you over on hoistthecolors.net, IGO's site, if you're a VIP member, if you're not subscribed, he said today confirmation that there is a sitting FBS head coach that has confirmed he is interested in the job in Clay Helton. Of course, I've made it very clear I'm a fan of his brother Tyson Helton, but Clay Helton does want the job. You're hearing a lot about LSU offensive coordinator and former East Carolina player Joe Sloan. So you're going to see a lot of names come up, and we'll get into that discussion more. And I think if Blake wins, he'll become a candidate, even if it's like 3-2. And the reason I say that is I think Pirate Nation, if he wins, is going to fall in love with Blake as a head coach because of his personality. I really do. But as far as the game this Saturday, I expect a low-scoring slugfest. I'll say Pirates get it done 23-20.
All right, I'm going. Trying to think. I think it's going to be Pirates 27 and Temple 21. So that's what I had. I was thinking 28. I'll just say 27-21. Anyway, I guess we won't have Matt or Bubba's prediction, but I assume they'll pick the Pirates. We'll see. It's been so far the betting folks are betting on the Pirates. We'll see if that continues for the next few days. Kyle, thank you so much, man. Well, thanks to Bubba, and we appreciate everybody for joining us tonight. And go out and support, like I said, the Pirates. And we'll be back on Sunday night for the Pirate Playback right here on the Sports Objective. Good night, everybody. And as always, go Pirates.
You're watching the Sports Objective, the podcast for Pirates.